By harnessing solar power, this purifier makes clean water accessible to everyone.
This kid's so proud. My child, I am so sorry for everything. I forgive you, Mama. We are family. Thank you.
My daughters, you've done it!
We are so proud of you.
In the bustling town of Abamusa interstate, where red dust clung stubbornly to sandals and gossip traveled faster than harmattan wind, there lived a woman named Aduni Koka, a woman whose back remained straight no matter how heavily life tried to bend it. She had been married for 15 years to Babatunde Koka, a respected trader whose laughter used to fill their compound before it was replaced by whispers of disappointment, and during those 15 years Aduni had given birth to 5 children, 5 beautiful, brilliant daughters, but in a community that measured a woman's worth by the sons she produced, her gifts were treated like curses wrapped in silk. The neighbors called her the Girl Factory, laughing loudly enough for the walls to hear, while her mother-in-law Mama Baba, whose tongue was sharper than a razor blade, woke every morning with insults ready like soldiers on parade, reminding Aduni that she had failed to give the family a male heir to carry the Koka name. The compound itself seemed to echo with mockery, especially after Babatunde married a second wife, Mareo from Abadan, a young woman whose beauty sparkled like polished bronze and who, within her first year, gave birth to a son named Alyamide, instantly crowned as the prince of the household. The golden child whose smallest sneeze was celebrated like a national holiday, while Aduni's daughters, Tolani the genius, Taiwo and Kahind the melodious twins, Fumaleo the curious inventor, and Little Ayamide the mathematical prodigy, were treated like background noise in their own home. Every family meeting turned into a tribunal against Aduni, with uncles suggesting more wives as though children were products to be ordered from a market shelf, while even her own mother phoned with trembling shame, urging her to visit herbalists or prayer houses to fix her womb. Yet through all of it, Aduni remained silent, swallowing humiliation like bitter herbs, choosing dignity over argument, because she knew something the others did not, that her daughters were not accidents or mistakes, but seeds of greatness planted in quiet soil. Tolani could memorize entire textbooks after a single reading. Taiwo and Kahind sang in harmonies so pure that birds paused mid-flight. Fumaleo dismantled broken radios just to understand how sound traveled through wires, and Ayamide solved mathematics problems meant for students twice her age, but in the eyes of tradition their talents were invisible, overshadowed by the loud celebration of one small boy who had done nothing more than be born male. Still, as the sun set each evening over the rust-colored rooftops of Abamusa, Aduni would gather her daughters close, whispering encouragement into their ears like sacred prayers, telling them that their worth was not defined by narrow minds or outdated customs. And though tears sometimes escaped her when she thought no one was watching, she refused to let bitterness grow in her heart, because somewhere deep inside her spirit burned a quiet confidence that time would reveal what mockery had concealed, and that the very daughters they laughed at would one day become the pillars that held up not only the Koka family but the entire town that once scorned them. The stage was being set, unseen and uncelebrated, for a transformation so powerful that it would shake pride from its throne and replace it with humbled gratitude. But for now, in the dim light of uncertainty, Aduni remained the woman they mocked, unaware that destiny was sharpening its blade in silence. The year Tolani Koka graduated from university was the year destiny stopped whispering and began to clear its throat, because in a country where unemployment prowled like a hungry lion, she finished top of her class in computer engineering with first-class honors, her name shining on the board like polished gold. And when she walked across the stage to receive her certificate, her mother Aduni felt something shift inside her chest, a quiet confirmation that suffering had not been wasted. Back in Abamusa, however, celebration was thin and cautious, because Mama Baba dismissed the achievement with a wave of her hand, insisting that no amount of certificates could replace the importance of a son, while Mareo adjusted her wrapper proudly, reminding anyone who would listen that her Alyamide was the true heir of the Koka lineage. Yet within weeks of graduation Tolani received an employment offer from a major technology firm in Lagos with a salary so astonishing it eclipsed her father's annual earnings, and when she showed the letter to Aduni their small kitchen felt too tiny to contain such news, the paper trembling in her mother's hands like a prophecy fulfilled. Babatunde himself sat in stunned silence, pride wrestling with cultural expectation inside him, unsure whether to celebrate loudly or nod modestly, because in his upbringing daughters were meant to marry well, not out-earn their fathers, but money has a language even tradition understands, and when Tolani's first Paycheck arrived, it repaired leaking roofs, replaced broken furniture, and filled the pantry with abundance that had long been missing. Still, the extended family refused to surrender their prejudice, laughing that a job was temporary while sons were eternal, unaware that the ground beneath their certainty was already cracking. Meanwhile, Taiwo and Kihind, the twins whose voices carried the sweetness of ripe mangoes, secretly auditioned for a nationally televised music competition, and when the acceptance letter came announcing they had made the top finalists of Nigerian Idol, the compound erupted not with pride but suspicion, Mama Baba muttering that singing was not a serious profession while neighbors predicted quick embarrassment. Yet the night the twins first appeared on television wearing matching Ankara outfits and delivering a performance so breathtaking that judges rose to their feet, Abamusa fell silent, because suddenly the girls once dismissed as excess baggage were commanding the attention of an entire nation. Votes poured in week after week, strangers chanting their names, billboards flashing their faces, radio stations replaying their harmonies until even skeptics found themselves humming along, and as fame grew so did the discomfort of those who had mocked them, especially Moreo, whose precious Alumide now struggled with homework and discipline while the so-called useless girls were trending across social media. At school, teachers spoke of Fumaleo's unusual scientific curiosity, of how she turned discarded materials into functioning prototypes, while little Iamide's mathematics teacher began recommending her for competitions meant for secondary students. And though the family elders continued insisting that male legacy was superior, reality was staging a rebellion they could not silence. One evening, as the twins advanced into the competition's final round and Tolani prepared for corporate training in Lagos, Aduni stood alone beneath the wide African sky, remembering every insult, every tear swallowed, every night she had prayed quietly for validation, and she realized something profound, that destiny does not argue with ignorance, it simply performs. And performance has a way of rewriting narratives without seeking permission. What had begun as whispers was now an unmistakable rhythm, a drumbeat of change echoing through the Coca household, and though pride still clung stubbornly to some hearts, the evidence was impossible to ignore. The daughters were rising, not in defiance, but in undeniable excellence, and the laughter that once filled the compound was slowly losing its confidence, replaced by a fragile uncertainty that perhaps, just perhaps, the measure of a child was never meant to be determined by gender at all. Destiny was no longer hiding in the shadows, it was stepping boldly into the courtyard, and those who once mocked Aduni could feel the temperature of the story beginning to change. If Tolani's success was a rising tide and the twins' fame a rolling wave, then what happened next was nothing short of a tsunami that crashed through Abamusa with such force that even the most stubborn hearts trembled, because while the family was still arguing over whether girls could truly bring honor to a lineage, 15-year-old Fumaleo Coca quietly entered a national science competition with an invention she had built from scraps collected in markets and mechanic shops, a solar-powered water purification system capable of turning contaminated stream water into clean, drinkable life using only local materials. And when the judges saw her demonstration, when they watched muddy brown liquid transform into crystal clarity under the glow of the sun, they exchanged stunned glances that signaled history unfolding before their eyes. She did not merely win the competition, she dominated it, earning first prize of 10 million naira, a full international scholarship to any university of her choice, and a government-backed contract to develop her innovation for rural communities across Nigeria. And within hours reporters swarmed the Coca compound, cameras flashing like lightning while journalists shouted questions about the teenage genius from a town once known only for gossip. The governor sent representatives with congratulatory plaques, radio stations requested interviews, and newspapers printed her photograph on their front pages with headlines celebrating the girl who might solve Africa's water crisis. And as villagers who once mocked Aduni now lined up outside her gate offering forced smiles and exaggerated praise, Mama Baba sat rigid in her chair, her pride cracking under the weight of undeniable evidence, muttering that something supernatural must be responsible because surely this level of favor could not be ordinary. Meanwhile, Taiwo and Kahind advanced to the grand finale of Nigerian Idol, their harmonies now echoing beyond Nigeria's borders as diaspora communities cast votes, and when they were announced winners, claiming 50 million naira, a recording contract, and a brand new car, the sound of celebration thundered through Abamusa like festival drums. Yet even then some elders stubbornly insisted that fame was fleeting while sons were permanent, unaware that permanence is built on impact, not chromosomes, as if heaven itself had decided to remove every remaining doubt. Little Iamide, only 7 years old but already solving algebra-like puzzles, uploaded a video of herself explaining a complex mathematical theorem with clarity that stunned online viewers, and within days the clip went viral, attracting the attention of international academic organizations and even a global children's quiz program searching for prodigies, and it seemed that blessings were popping one after another like corn in hot oil, too rapid for skeptics to dismiss. But Babatunde, once pressured to seek additional wives, now walked differently, his shoulders broad not with male airs but with achievement he could no longer deny, while the very uncles who had mocked Aduni began advising others about investing in daughters, rewriting their previous arguments as though history had amnesia. Yet amid the whirlwind of glory, tension simmered quietly in the corner where Maria watched her son Alyamide struggle with discipline, teachers complaining about fights and unfinished homework, the boy's temper sharp and unchecked because he had been praised for existence rather than effort, and though no one dared say it aloud, comparison hung in the air like thick humidity. One unforgettable afternoon, when the family traveled to consult a traditional oracle hoping to understand why fortune favored the girls so extravagantly, the old diviner cast his sacred objects upon the ground, studied their patterns, and laughed, not with mockery but revelation, declaring that the family had mistaken diamonds for stones and that greatness had never been absent, only unrecognized, a pronouncement that unsettled even the boldest among them, and as they departed the shrine still arguing, a near accident in the road was avoided only because drivers swerved to protect little Alyamide standing calmly at the center, her composure eerie and luminous in the chaos, an image so symbolic it felt scripted by destiny itself, because while two vehicles collided in confusion, the child they once ignored remained unharmed, steady and radiant, as though shielded by unseen favor. By the time they returned home that evening, silence had replaced skepticism, and for the first time the compound that once echoed with ridicule felt small beneath the magnitude of what was unfolding, because Glory had arrived not as a polite guest but as a roaring force of correction, dismantling prejudice brick by brick, and Aduni, who had endured years of humiliation with grace, stood at the doorway watching the sunset with tears of gratitude glistening on her cheeks, aware that what was happening was bigger than wealth or fame. It was the restoration of dignity, the rewriting of value, the undeniable proof that blessings do not always come packaged according to tradition's expectations, and that when destiny chooses to speak, even the loudest mockery must fall silent. Success, when it comes too quickly for some hearts to process, does not always produce celebration. Sometimes it exposes fractures that were carefully hidden beneath pride. And in the Coca compound the crown that had once rested so confidently upon Moreo's head began to tilt as reality revealed uncomfortable truths, because while Tolani prepared for advanced corporate training abroad, signing contracts that placed her among the rising leaders of Nigeria's tech industry, and Taiwo and Kahind traveled across cities performing before roaring crowds who sang their lyrics word for word, and Fumaleo collaborated with engineers to scale her solar purification innovation for rural deployment. And little Alyamide received a formal invitation to compete in an international mathematics championship for gifted children. Alyamide, the long-celebrated prince, was unraveling quietly but dangerously. At first the warning signs were dismissed as boys being boys, minor classroom disruptions, incomplete assignments, disrespectful replies to teachers, yet each report grew heavier than the last, until suspension letters replaced progress reports and Moreo's confident smile stiffened into defensive anger, insisting that her son was misunderstood, that jealous instructors targeted him because of his family's rising fame, but deep down even she felt the truth scratching at her certainty. Alyamide had been praised for his gender rather than guided toward character. Meanwhile Mama Baba, once fierce in her insistence that sons were superior, found herself in a strange emotional battlefield, torn between loyalty to tradition and the undeniable evidence that the daughters she had scorned were now paying her medical bills, renovating the aging house into a modern mansion with gleaming tiles and a swimming pool that reflected the sky like polished glass, replacing Babatunde's coughing vehicle with a brand new SUV, restoring ancestral land that had nearly been sold to settle debts, and transforming the Coca name into a symbol of excellence throughout her state. Neighbors who once laughed now lowered their voices respectfully when Aduni passed, market women offering discounts with exaggerated humility, while the same brother-in-law who had joked about forgetting the recipe for boys now bowed in greeting, praising the daughters as blessings sent directly from heaven. And though the shift in attitude was dramatic, it did not erase the years of humiliation stored in memory. Yet Aduni carried no visible bitterness, choosing instead to let grace complete what success had begun. The real rupture came when Alyamide, now a teenager with a growing appetite for rebellion, was expelled from yet another school for fighting and theft, caught with a group of delinquent boys who mistook recklessness for strength, and when news reached the compound that he had been detained by authorities after a failed robbery attempt at a local market, the shame descended like a storm cloud. Heavy and suffocating, silencing even the boldest defenders of male superiority, Marayo's once proud posture collapsed inward, her laughter replaced by hidden tears, while Mama Baba's health faltered under the weight of regret. Her blood pressure rising as she replayed every insult she had thrown at Aduni, every dismissal of the daughters who were now the family's backbone, and for the first time the narrative that had governed their thinking for decades stood exposed as fragile and flawed. Babatunde himself confronted a painful reckoning, realizing that his passive acceptance of cultural pressure had nearly cost him the peace of his household, and as he watched Aduni move through crisis with calm strength, coordinating legal assistance and counseling options for Alyamide despite the history of ridicule, he understood that true royalty is measured not by heirs but by integrity. The compound that once celebrated the birth of a boy as automatic victory now faced the humbling lesson that potential must be cultivated, not assumed, and that entitlement without discipline breeds disaster. Whispers spread through Abamusa not of mockery but of caution, parents reconsidering the language they used around their children, elders debating whether perhaps tradition required refinement rather than blind defense, and in the quiet corners of her renovated home, Aduni prayed not for revenge or vindication but for restoration, for Alyamide's heart to be reshaped, for Marayo to find humility without despair, and for her daughters to remain grounded despite meteoric success. The cracks in the crown were no longer hidden, and as pride crumbled under the pressure of reality, the family stood at a crossroads where blame could either divide them permanently or humility could rebuild what arrogance had fractured, and in that fragile moment, it became clear that the greatest victory was not fame or fortune, but the opportunity to transform pain into wisdom before regret hardened into ruin. The night Mama Baba sent for Aduni, the air inside the Grand Coca mansion felt heavier than it had during the years when its walls were cracked and its roof leaked, because this time the weight pressing down on the household was not poverty but regret. And as Aduni walked quietly into the dimly lit room where her once fierce mother-in-law lay resting against embroidered pillows, she saw not the sharp-tongued woman who had mocked her for 15 years but a frail elder whose pride had finally surrendered to truth. Mama Baba's voice, once loud enough to command an entire compound, trembled like dry leaves in harmattan wind as she reached for Aduni's hand, her eyes glistening with tears that refused to be held back, and for a long moment silence spoke louder than any insult ever had. Because humility, when it arrives genuinely, carries a gravity that words struggle to contain. I have been blind, she whispered at last, confessing that she had mistaken gender for greatness, that she had worshipped the idea of a male heir while ignoring the living miracles growing before her eyes, admitting that the daughters she once dismissed had become the pillars supporting her old age, paying hospital bills without complaint, restoring the family's dignity without bitterness, and showing a generosity that exposed the poverty of her own past thinking. Outside the room, members of the extended family gathered anxiously, aware that something historic was unfolding, because never in living memory had Mama Baba publicly admitted wrongdoing, and when she asked them all to enter, her confession expanded beyond private regret into communal reckoning, as she declared that tradition had been misused as a weapon against an innocent woman and her children, that culture should uplift rather than suffocate, and that she had allowed fear of lineage to overshadow gratitude for blessings already present. Chief Adeliki, whose booming voice had once advocated for more wives and more sons, stood unusually silent, his large frame seeming smaller as shame bent his shoulders, and one by one relatives who had laughed at Aduni offered apologies that stumbled awkwardly yet sincerely from their lips, acknowledging that envy and ignorance had blinded them to excellence. Marayo, her pride long dismantled by her son's struggles, fell to her knees before Aduni, tears streaming freely as she confessed her cruelty, admitting that she had weaponized her temporary advantage to humiliate another woman, and asking not only for forgiveness but for guidance in saving Alyamide from the path he was traveling. In that emotionally charged room, Aduni could have chosen triumph, could have recited every insult like evidence in a courtroom of vindication, but instead she demonstrated the very strength that had carried her through humiliation, lifting Marayo gently and assuring Mama Baba that forgiveness was not a favor but a choice she had already made long ago, explaining that resentment would only poison the future her daughters were building, and that true victory lay in unity rather than revenge. Her words did not erase the past, but they transformed its meaning, turning wounds into lessons and shame into opportunity for growth. And as Tolani arranged specialized counseling for Alyamide through professional networks, as Taiwo and Kahind pledged financial support for rehabilitation programs, as Fumaleo spoke about mentorship initiatives for young boys lacking direction, and as Little Alyamide offered innocent encouragement that made even hardened adults smile through tears, the family witnessed a model of leadership more powerful than any inheritance, compassion paired with excellence. news of the reconciliation spread quietly through Abamusa, inspiring conversations in marketplaces and church gatherings about the value of daughters and the danger of favoritism, and for the first time in decades the Coca compound became known not for scandal or rivalry but for transformation. Because the apology that night did more than mend relationships, it dismantled a mindset that had limited generations, proving that humility can rebuild what arrogance nearly destroyed. As the family joined hands in prayer before leaving the room, gratitude replaced tension, and Mama Baba, still weak but spiritually lighter, declared that her grandchildren, every one of them, male and female alike, were equal blessings whose destinies depended not on tradition's narrow lens, but on the content of their character, and in that moment the house that had once echoed with mockery resonated instead with healing, the kind that does not shout but endures, sealing a chapter of bitterness and opening another defined by respect, unity, and a deeper understanding that greatness is not inherited through gender but cultivated through love, discipline, and opportunity. Years moved forward like a steady river carving its path through stone, and in that time the 5 daughters of Aduni did not merely succeed, they ascended, each in her own orbit, until the name Coca became synonymous not with the absence of sons but with the presence of brilliance. Because Tolani's journey in the technology world accelerated beyond even her boldest dreams as she climbed corporate ranks with strategic intelligence and unshakable discipline, eventually founding her own software company in Lagos that expanded across West Africa, employing hundreds of young graduates and pioneering digital solutions that attracted international investors, her leadership style blending innovation with empathy in a way that redefined what executive power could look like. Taiwo and Kihind, the Harmony twins once doubted by their own grandmother, transformed from reality show champions into global music sensations, touring continents, collaborating with international artists, and using their platform to fund educational programs for girls in underserved communities, their voices no longer just melodies but movements advocating for equality and opportunity. Fumileo's scientific breakthrough in solar-powered water purification evolved into a continent-wide initiative as her technology was implemented in over 20 African nations, drastically reducing waterborne diseases in rural regions, earning her international awards and invitations to speak before world leaders about sustainable innovation, while she remained grounded enough to return frequently to Abamusa to mentor students who reminded her of herself. Little Iamide, once the quiet child solving equations beyond her years, became the youngest winner of a prestigious global mathematics championship and earned admission into an elite university abroad before most teenagers had chosen career paths. Her analytical brilliance paired with humility that reflected her mother's guidance, and as if destiny wished to complete the constellation, the 5th daughter, often overlooked in earlier years amid the noise of comparison, emerged as an extraordinary athlete whose discipline and resilience led her to win gold medals on international tracks. Her speed symbolizing the forward momentum of an entire family once held back by outdated expectations. Together these 5 women did more than accumulate wealth and fame, they redefined legacy, investing in community infrastructure, building a state-of-the-art school in her state where boys and girls received equal encouragement, establishing scholarships under their mother's name to support young women pursuing science and technology, and transforming the once modest family compound into a beacon of opportunity rather than judgment. Babatunde, now older and wiser, often sat on the veranda watching the sunset reflect against the mansion's glass windows, marveling at how close he had come to misunderstanding his own blessings, grateful that time had corrected what pride nearly distorted, while Mama Baba, restored in health and humility, became one of the loudest advocates for gender equality in family gatherings, telling younger mothers never to measure their children by outdated scales. Even Alyamide, after years of structured rehabilitation, mentorship, and patient guidance from his stepsisters, gradually rebuilt his path, discovering a talent for mechanical engineering that channeled his restless energy into constructive creation, and though his journey was slower and marked by earlier mistakes, it stood as living proof that redemption is possible when support replaces favoritism. Abamusa itself changed as a result of the Coca daughters' impact. Market conversations shifting from gossip about male heirs to admiration for academic achievements, church sermons referencing their story as a lesson in recognizing divine gifts regardless of form, and young girls walking with straighter backs because they had tangible evidence that their dreams were valid. Through it all, Aduni remained the quiet center of the storm she had endured and the calm she had cultivated, never seeking headlines yet receiving respect that no title could manufacture, because the true miracle was not merely that her daughters became stars, but that she had nurtured them in soil once considered barren, proving that resilience combined with love can outgrow any prejudice. And as the world celebrated the Coca sisters for their accomplishments across Technology, music, science, academia, and athletics, the deeper transformation was evident within the family itself, where laughter now carried gratitude instead of mockery, where success was shared rather than competed over, and where legacy was no longer defined by carrying a surname but by elevating its meaning, turning what began as a story of ridicule into a testament of unstoppable ascent, 5 stars rising not to overshadow one another but to illuminate an entire generation watching from below. By the time the Coca family gathered to celebrate Mama Baba's 80th birthday, the compound that had once echoed with ridicule had transformed into a landmark of inspiration in Abu Musa, decorated with elegant lights, flowing fabrics, and photographs that documented a journey from humiliation to honor, and as dignitaries, community leaders, scholars, musicians, and young students filled the courtyard, it became clear that the story of Aduni and her daughters had grown far beyond family gossip. Into cultural testimony, Tolani arrived from Lagos accompanied by executives who now regarded her as one of the most visionary technology entrepreneurs in West Africa. Taiwo and Kihind flew in between international tour dates to perform a heartfelt tribute song dedicated to their mother. Fumaleo presented a short documentary highlighting how her water purification systems had improved rural healthcare statistics across multiple African countries. Ayamide spoke briefly yet powerfully about the importance of early childhood education in mathematics and science, and the once-overlooked athletics sister displayed the gold medals that had placed Nigeria proudly on global podiums, each achievement standing not as individual triumph but as collective correction to a mindset that once dismissed them. Babatunde, standing beside Aduni under the soft glow of evening lanterns, publicly acknowledged his failure to challenge harmful expectations earlier in his marriage, admitting before the assembled crowd that silence in the face of injustice can be as damaging as direct cruelty, and his confession carried weight because it modeled accountability for fathers listening among the guests. Mama Baba, frail yet radiant with humility, requested the microphone and addressed the gathering with a voice that, though softer than in her domineering years, carried deeper authority, recounting how she once equated legacy solely with sons and how life had disciplined her perspective, urging elders present to nurture every child equally because destiny does not announce itself according to gender, and her words drew tears from women who had endured similar pressures in silence. Even Alyamide, now a young man studying mechanical engineering after years of guidance and correction, stepped forward to thank his stepsisters for refusing to abandon him when he had nearly destroyed his future, acknowledging that favoritism had weakened him while discipline and mentorship rebuilt him, and his humility completed the circle of transformation that began with prejudice and matured into wisdom. Throughout the evening, guests repeated a phrase that had become synonymous with the family: success has no gender. A truth embodied not only by fame and wealth, but by the scholarship foundation the sisters had established in their mother's name, the community innovation hub they funded interstate to train young inventors regardless of background, and the annual cultural forum they hosted to discuss balancing tradition with progress. As fireworks illuminated the night sky above the mansion that once symbolized division, Aduni stood quietly observing the celebration, remembering the years when she was called the girl-making machine, recalling market laughter, whispered insults, and lonely tears shed under dim kerosene light, and she realized that the greatest reward was not revenge or public validation but witnessing a generational shift in thinking, seeing young fathers in attendants holding their daughters with pride rather than apology, hearing teenage boys applaud female achievement without insecurity, sensing that the narrative had permanently evolved. The Coca name, once nearly fractured by narrow expectations, now represented resilience, equality, and vision. A legacy rewritten not through argument but through excellence sustained over time, and as the music swelled and the crowd danced beneath the stars, it felt as though the entire town of Abamusa was participating in a collective awakening, understanding at last that blessings often arrive in forms tradition fails to predict. When the celebration drew to a close and the final guests departed, Aduni gathered her children, every one of them, daughters and son alike, into an embrace that symbolized unity rather than hierarchy, whispering gratitude for the journey that had tested but never broken them, and in that quiet family circle lay the true moral of their story, that a child's worth is measured not by the expectations of society but by the character they cultivate, that mockery eventually exhausts itself while perseverance compounds into generational impact, and that the packages we underestimate today may contain tomorrow's transformation. Long after the lanterns were extinguished and the compound returned to stillness, the legacy endured, carried in the minds of those who witnessed it and in the hearts of young girls who now dared to dream without apology, because the story Of Aduni Koka was no longer about a woman who failed to produce sons, it was about a mother who produced leaders, innovators, artists, scholars, athletes, and above all compassionate human beings, proving beyond debate that destiny recognizes no gender and that those who once laughed must one day learn to applaud.